Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have with us Dr. Shankar Acharya, who was Chief Economic Advisor in the Finance Ministry with both the UPA government and subsequently the NDA. So he's straddled different governments. So to that extent, would have great institutional memory. Currently, he is honorary professor at ICRIER, a think tank, where he does a lot of work on contemporary policy matters. Welcome to our show, Dr. Shankar Acharya. So,
thank you very much.
So you worked with so many prime ministers, finance ministers. You worked with Manmohan Singh. You worked with Yashwant Sinha as finance minister. Later, Jaswant Singh. Now we have a different NDA government. Just completed 1 year. So, what do you make of the 1 year of NDA in terms of performance, in terms of policy initiatives? Because I read your piece in the Business Standard, a very well articulated piece where you have positives and negatives. You've listed them. So let's begin with positives. So which are the 3-4 things that you like about what this government has done on the policy front the last 1 year?
Well, I think first point that I think it's important to stress is that, as I did in my article, that it's important to focus on policies rather than, when you only had 1 year of a government.
Yeah, okay.
The economic outcomes,
will take time.
So-called performance, will really reflect the past much more than what has been done during the year.
Sure.
It will also reflect exogenous thing, oil price going down, rains failing, whatever, that sort of thing. So I think it's important to focus on policies initiated, good or bad, or not touched.
Or not initiated.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the spirit of, I think, my piece. And in terms of answering your question about some of the things that I regard, first of all, I think, let me also say that my overall take is that compared to what might have been done, it was a reasonably good year for the government. Okay. Compared to what I would regard as highly exaggerated expectations.
Politically speaking.
Well, politically, stock market speaking, everything. A lot of people may feel let down.
You think stock market was a huge expectation of this government?
I think it was, I mean, I think...
If you remember, before the government came to power, all the equity research heads sitting in Singapore, London, were putting down Modi's name in their research papers, saying that if he comes, we'll have a multi-year bull run.
Yeah, but I mean, I think a lot of people, for example, did not appreciate, I mean, those who perhaps buy stocks and shares on a regular basis and so on, that it's one thing to have a majority in the lower house, the Lok Sabha. But if you're far short of a majority in the Rajya Sabha, which of course is the actual state of play, then you really can't get legislation through without cooperation of opposition. And so that's a very big factor. But anyway,
so what about policy outside of the legislative
arena? Even within, we'll take both. In terms of positives, I would say that come to mind, which are significant. First, on inflation. Certainly, they were lucky on the international commodity prices, so no question, the government.
Oil prices halving.
All that, and other commodity prices. But at the same time, I think they moved very quickly to do a couple of things. First, I think they, we had excess food stocks beginning of the last fiscal year, and they did move to deploy them through open market sales and so on, at least some of that. And I think that was significant. They also, I mean, perhaps not as wholeheartedly as some might wish, but they on the whole supported the Reserve Bank in its cautious, conservative approach to monetary policy. So if you take all these three things, good luck, and by the way, the good luck has to be qualified because on the rainfall side, they haven't been lucky.
So it got countered, it got neutralized to some extent.
To some extent. But overall, the oil price thing was very big. So if you take that good luck, you take the deployment of excess food stocks, and if you take conservative monetary policy together, I think that all helped bring inflation down, and I think that's a very big plus.
And you also mentioned, as a positive point, Arun Jaitley's attempt to keep the fisc reasonably under control.
Yeah, I think that's significant. Yeah. Though I think since that was running at roughly 4%, I don't think there was a big difference that happened there.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think certainly it didn't shoot up or anything like that.
Are you disappointed that interest rates have not been brought down by RBI? Although we had several months of sequential negative wholesale inflation and flat, I'm told, sequentially flat consumer inflation.
Yeah.
Which year on year, I'm told, in the next few months, it could go down to even 4% or below 4%.
Well, that's not clear.
There's a base effect or whatever.
It depends also on what happens as a result of the excess rains in March.
Yeah.
It depends on what happens.
No, what I'm saying is this a missed opportunity? Especially China is bringing down interest rates. Everybody is,
But, well, you can argue it either way. Yeah. I mean, it's not a clear-cut call, but I would, on the whole, sympathize with the Reserve Bank governor in being cautious. When you've had 6 successive years before this of consumer price inflation, which is what really hurts people, and double digits or close to double digits, averaging around 10% or so. And that's the first time in our entire post-independent history that we've had that. So a little bit of excess caution on monetary policy, and that's all he controls, with respect to inflation, is, I think, perfectly all right. Okay. Now, getting back to your question on some of the other good things that have happened, I think things like, if one were to just tick them off and you can pick up whatever one you want to further elaborate on, or want me to elaborate on, I think this government has been very serious on pushing GST, goods and services tax forward. Yeah. And they've made a fair bit of progress. Sure. Obviously, the story is not over, but they've really taken it on. Yeah. I think under both getting infrastructure moving as well as perhaps giving a fillip to manufacturing, you really need to do things on our factor markets. Yeah. By that I mean the land market,
labor
market. Yeah. And on both these fronts, they moved I think you have to give some credit, quite a lot of credit, I would say, to the government in trying to push forward. As you know, on the land, first they had an ordinance, then they had an amended bill, which has now gone to committee, joint committee, I think.
Sure. The land is stuck in Rajya Sabha. Yeah. But on labour, Shankar, do you feel that they are a bit tentative in the sense that they're letting the state governments do it, but the centre is not coming up front and taking a call on that?
Well, 2 points, Venu. First, I think letting the states do it is not a completely passive act, for one thing, because as I understand it, if state legislatures pass some laws in the concurrent area, which are not on all fours with the national law on the same subject, which is the case here, it requires a positive act of the central government to recommend to the president to go ahead and sign off on the state law, which is what happened, as you know, in the case of the Rajasthan labour reforms, which are, in one sense, relatively modest, but it's being done at least for the first time in 25 years or whatever it is. These were followed, I believe, on the same pattern by Haryana and perhaps also Himachal, and something different, slightly different in Madhya Pradesh, but I'm not sure where that exactly stands. So that's point one. Point two, I did feel for a while that, this is perhaps not enough, that the centre too has to play a proactive role, given, this...
or at least express its conviction.
Yeah, and given the need to promote decent jobs, which is a crying need, given what we know about labour supply projections and so forth. Relatively recently, in the last month or so, we have been reading reports, as you know, that Labour Ministry, and presumably with authorization from the top, has talked about integrating 3 major acts: Industrial Disputes, Trade Unions Act, and some other act.
Which you mentioned in your article.
And I think now that's early days. We don't know what hurdles it will face. We don't know how far it will go. But the point is, I think they're trying to do the right thing. So in that sense, I welcome that as well. Then on this whole Jan Dhan financial inclusion stuff, getting that platform rolling and rolling fast. In a way, you can say accelerating what was happening before.
Yeah,
so
it is.
It's not as if nothing was happening before. Is, I think, very important, because it gives you a tool which you can deploy. I mean, a lot of people will say, oh yes, but two-thirds of these accounts have no money in them. Fine. But the point is, once various schemes come into play, it becomes a mechanism to roll those schemes forward. The recent announcements, as you know, following from the last budget on these relatively low-end insurance schemes, both life and accident.
I guess that is more critical. Earlier, the fear was that most of these accounts would be non-operational,
right?
Which is what the previous finance minister Chidambaram also wrote in the Indian Express when they opened account. But here, if large number of these people, if they opt for the 12 rupee a year accident insurance, that means they'll be putting money, and 330 rupees
as well as there's
life insurance,
the modest pension scheme, contributory.
So that would really activate those accounts.
That would activate, and the other way, of course, which a lot of us hope, and we still hope, though it hasn't rolled out dramatically fast yet, is moving from our subsidy approach to direct cash transfer with respect to major things like food, fertilizer, kerosene,
which you mentioned,
kerosene and so forth. That part has yet to happen. We know that in LPG, something has been done. So I think having that platform and rolling and accelerating that platform is again a big move, important plus.
Shankar, we'll take a small break here and come back. Please don't go away and keep watching RSTV. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are speaking to Dr. Shankar Acharya, a leading economic thinker. Shankar, you laid out some positive items on the NDA's agenda, which they unveiled in the first year. Now, tell me, as an economist, you study the macro picture. What exactly is going on? Because we were given the impression when this government took over after the first quarter post-June, Prime Minister made a statement, Finance Minister had made a statement that the economy had bottomed out. But now it seems, if you go by statements coming from industrialists, businessmen, FIIs, their research, they are talking about a more deepening demand problem, which is reflecting in very low credit offtake, 21% negative export growth in March. You see any indicator? There seems to be a kind of flattening, and Ashok Gulati, agriculture economist, who is your colleague at ICRIER, has written a piece in Indian Express saying agriculture growth could probably be zero or even negative, the way things have panned out in the farm economy, in the deep crisis. So, given all these bad news, as it were, coming together, what's the way forward? I mean, where are we headed? And of course, government doesn't have control over many of these factors, as you said. So,
well, I mean, I think the key thing that remains to be sort of pushed on an upward track is investment. That, and to some extent, of course, I think the government is trying in that, in the areas particularly of
in roads,
public investment in infrastructure, especially roads and railways.
So that's a good strategy, public investment driven.
Well, I mean, I think I would like to see a much more, the private investment surge as well. But that's not in the government's hands directly. It can only hope to create an environment where that happens. And for that clearly, you're right, that I think the signals of private investment booming hasn't yet happened. There are a number of reasons for it. Excess capacity is there. The fact that a lot of firms are over-leveraged because of past excess borrowing, particularly in some of the private infrastructure area.
The total industry is working at some 65% capacity.
Yeah, that's what I meant by excess capacity. So I think, this has to be worked through. And this is independent of whichever government would have come to power 1 year ago. So I think this is again where my point about expectations of a massive jump being unrealistic. But by the way, the CSO's data on growth and so on suggests that actually the economy wasn't so bad and actually is also continuing to recover. Personally, I still continue to believe that I'm a little skeptical of data which suggests that we grew at 7% in 2013-14, or nearly 7%, and that in the last year...
Actually, you're right. Most foreign investment research firms, they tend to support your view. They say that 7% is the new 5%.
Something like that. Something like that. Yeah, I don't. Let's not get into a data thing. But I mean, so I think the basic point that it's not yet a booming economy, absolutely correct in my view, despite whatever CSO national income figures are. And I think for that to happen, one will need to see the private investment cycle turn upwards. And that's where you ask, are policies aimed in the right direction? And my argument would be that a lot of policies seem to be. Some I would like to see more done. For example, you take the problem of public sector banks. We know that there are quite deep problems of...
I think that's one area which has been left somewhat untouched.
Yeah, I think so far as I can make out that it's broadly untouched. At the same time, the government hasn't jumped into saying, look, we'll recapitalize you no matter what amount of money you need. They seem to be taking a slightly more discriminating approach, which is, look, until you get your performance indicators in order, we're not going to give you fresh capital. And that, whether it'll work, let's see. But the point is...
Here, on banks, Shankar, there's one small clarification.
Sure.
The budget, I'm told, provides for a very small amount for recapitalization of banks. I think it's somewhere 11,500. That's the figure I read in an article. But actually, going by the norms, they would need multiple times that. So,
you see, I think with particularly with the public sector banks, I think
these are about public sector banks only.
I mean, because the private sector banks mostly are doing quite well. Thank you. Public sector banks, I think, a lot of the problem is intimately linked to excess lending, possibly at previous governments' behest, let me say, to various infrastructure PPP type,
which are stretched,
which are now lying idle, stressed asset, caught up in this kind of clearance, that kind of clearance, whatever they are. But basically the banks are not getting their money back, and that's why their NPAs have gone up to above 4%. I think in the case of public sector banks.
And that's why sometimes the RBI governor says public sector banks are not able to bring down interest rates. Because that's a constraint, there's so much money locked up there.
They're getting nothing on some of their balance sheet. So that's one example where I think the way forward is not yet been clearly articulated.
But it's a very important component of growth revival, right?
Sure. Another area where I think I am at least, I feel so far a little disappointed is, we've already mentioned this earlier, is this move from these massive subsidies that we have, huge ones, in particularly food and fertilizer and kerosene to some extent, to a much more direct cash transfer basis, where you do away with all sorts of middlemen, hugely expensive structures and distribution systems, and all studies...
You mentioned Shanta Kumar committee recommendation also in that context.
That is in the context of the food economy. You could save money
on management of food stocks. Why don't you do it?
And use it for irrigation and rural infrastructure. I mean, that's one. Fertilizer too is a bit of a holy cow in our system, as you know, and I mean particularly urea.
And food and fertilizers together about 2 lakh crores, right?
I think together, if you count arrears as well, they come to that. And that's a very big amount of money. Now, at the same time, one has to appreciate that in a bad agricultural year, which this is, touching the the fertilizer subsidy is very difficult politically. But I'm hoping that as another year or two pass, there'll be some systemic change so that that whole Jan Dhan mechanism is used to move gradually, you can't do it overnight, to direct cash transfers with respect to your major subsidies. Then I think really the Jan Dhan system will have paid off.
Okay. Tell me, you also mentioned in your article about the black money bill. You have problems with the black money bill in the sense that you suggest that it could create Inspector Raj in another form. So now, can you explain to us what...
look, I mean, we all know the history of, remember the Ferra days?
Sure.
Right? Now, this sort of thing could lead to a revival of the FERA system. So
kind of climate,
yeah. And then, it's not just, I'm not trying to say that guilty people should be protected. Forget that. But my question is, how much of law is already in place through which you can tackle these things? Because the problem with the current, it's about, I think it's already become an act, because I think it's passed the houses, and because it's seen as politically, nobody contests it. The problem is that it's quite draconian, because, A, it's a criminal thing, it's not a civil offense, and B, it seems that the burden of proof
is on the SSE.
Is on the SSE if, some account is found and he has not declared it and so on.
In fact, one tax lawyer has pointed out, very senior tax lawyer, Lakotia, he's pointed out that even the existing Income Tax Act has criminal provision. No, it has up to 6 years of, I think 5 or 6 years of imprisonment.
Like. And that is why I feel this thing was driven more politically after all the campaign talk about
getting money back.
And so this is a sort of in that context. But these are not costless. I mean, so too much of our legislation, and this is not about this government, it's true of all governments.
All governments,
something that is driven in quite a populist way, then gets on the statute book, and later on, some other government which may come, which really wants to, which sees the dangers and the costs of that legislation, and wants to do away with it, but then you can't.
How do you respond, Shankar, to this government's claim that it's trying to reduce red tape, and it's trying to, Mr. Modi has been talking about red carpet to replace red tape from day one after he took over as Prime Minister. But I hear businessmen continue to complain that, that the regulatory regime remains as dense as before. Tax administration, we had Partho Shom on this show, and he also expressed disappointment. The tax administration mindset is not about to change, which Mr. Jaitley has also admitted, the finance minister. Which was seen in the way the tax on, the minimum alternate tax on FIIs was handled. There was a yo-yoing starting from one position and then... and then the tax forms, in the name of simplification, what came was a more complicated... So are you satisfied on this score? Are you satisfied that this government is doing enough to reduce paperwork and increase ease of doing business in general?
I don't think we've seen enough, to be honest. I mean, we've yet to see really... But I'm willing to say this sort of thing, because it's an nitty-gritty kind of stuff, takes time. But, 1 year has passed, and another year one hopes to see something on the ground in some of these areas. The other point, of course, one has to recognize that, by and large, citizens of India, you and I included, most of our dealings are with levels of state government, except for something like income tax. But then income tax touches only 40 million SSCs out of 1.2 billion people. So really, when one is talking about less red tape and issues like that, a lot has to be done at state government level in order to clear away the undergrowth. But certainly, even in the central government level, I would accept the view that on the ground, a lot of the old ways are still continuing.
This argument can be extended to also the fact that corruption at the top level in state governments cannot be said to be over. Well, while this government claims, and many commentators are saying that maybe at the top level corruption has been weeded out, but then actual businesses are set up at the state level, right? So you're not sure whether corruption there...
I think the reality is, particularly if you remember the scams of the last decade, the big scams, and I only have to mention, telecom, coal, Commonwealth Games. And
but the coal was also happening state level. State government had given out so many coal blocks.
Of course. No, I'm not saying those problems are solved. All I'm saying is that there's plenty of it going on at the central government level. And I think I should agree with you that there is a perception now that at the top levels in the central government, this kind of big-ticket corruption in this year is perceptibly gone down in a very significant way. And I think we should welcome that. And the fact that it hasn't gone down in the states, or that there could be at the lower levels of central government less corruption, with respect to passport speeding up or
Sure.
whatever it is, or driver's license or whatever. Driver's license is not central government. That's a separate point. But I think there's been some progress.
So thank you very much, Dr. Shankar Acharya, for talking to us.
Thank you very
much. We
much.
hope in the next 1 year things improve in the areas that you suggested they are in deficit. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.